Up next, we are switching gears to focus on cybersecurity. And it might seem like a little bit of a complicated topic, but if we think about the way we live our lives, everything is digital. You know, my script is digital, everybody has an Apple Watch, and now we're beginning to think about distributed networks where the way that we make payments are digital, pharmacies are digital, even I'm about to buy a fridge, and I'm looking at smart fridges that tell me what's missing to my phone. And so next up, we have a really great panel that's going to be talking about cybersecurity in the new age. How do we think about shifting paradigms and adopting our approaches to ensure that things are indeed more secure? So please join me in welcoming to the stage the next set of panelists who are going to be focusing on redesigning cybersecurity. First up, we have the moderator of this conversation, Jaret Davis, who is the co-managing shareholder of Greenberg Traurig. Next, we have Andy Ellis, who is the Chief Security Officer of Akamai. Christopher Day, the General Manager, Threat Management and Analytics Manager of Cyxtera Technologies. And finally, we have Patrick Traynor, Associate Professor and Co-Director of the Florida Institute for Cybersecurity at University of Florida. Please join me in giving them a warm round of applause. We're going to focus on redesigning security. Gentlemen, welcome to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jaret Davis, and I have the privilege of serving as the co-managing shareholder for the Miami office of Greenberg Traurig. You know, quid pro quo, the quick commercial, 2 seconds. Greenberg Traurig is a full-service law firm handling significant transactional and litigation matters all over the U.S. and internationally. As of 2017, our firm held the distinction of being the largest law firm in the U.S. based on number of U.S. attorneys. We operate nearly in every hub in the United States as well as marquee urban hubs internationally. And most pertinent here, among the many fields in which we practice law, the few that has kept us as busy has been our cybersecurity, data privacy, and crisis management practice, which features a vast multidisciplinary team of attorneys who counsel clients on their data security, incident response, privacy, and info management needs. It's this demand by our clients which led us 5 years ago to team up with May Medina and co-founding the eMERGE Americas Conference. Today's forum is somewhat deceptively called Redesigning Security. I'd say deceptively only because redesigning security somewhat implies we're only going to talk at a tactical level. The truth is we're going to go far broader. So what are we seeking to accomplish today? Cybersecurity Ventures projects that between 2017 and 2021, $1 trillion will be spent globally on cybersecurity. It's safe to say that for each of the board of directors of Fortune 500 companies, cybersecurity risk is at the top of any risk assessment they conduct internally. However, notwithstanding all these resources and focus, many times it feels as if we're eternally playing catch-up. From increases in DDoS attacks to spam and phishing to malware insertion to most prevalent in recent times ransomware attacks, the job of the Chief Security Officer is daunting. So today, we're not going to simply go over best practices. Instead, we want to challenge both this panel and you to consider an entire paradigm shift as we discuss what's on the new frontier of cybersecurity and how these paradigm shifts can help you protect your enterprises from attack. Much of today's discussion is going to encourage you to stop thinking in terms of walls and perimeters and start focusing on individual users as human agents. And today we've assembled some of the top thought leaders in cybersecurity. Going in alphabetical order from my left on, Chris Day is the GM for Threat Management and Analytics at Cyxtera, a global security infrastructure provider, which is if not the primary driver of eMERGE Americas. Prior to Cyxtera, Chris was Chief Information Security Officer at Invincia, a next-generation endpoint security and anti-malware software company acquired by Sophos Limited in 2017. Before Invincia, Chris held a number of similar C-level positions within various cybersecurity-focused companies, including as Chief Security Architect for Terramark. In March 2013, Chris was appointed to the Defense Science Board, which provides guidance to the Secretary of Defense and other Department of Defense leaders on technical and strategic matters impacting national security. The White House National Security Council invited Chris to participate as controls staff for the 2012 national-level exercise that focused heavily on a major cybersecurity crisis. He also served on the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee's Secure Government Communications Subcommittee. Then we have Andy Ellis, Andy is Akamai's Chief Security Officer. In that role, he's responsible for overseeing the security architecture and compliance of Akamai's massive globally distributed network. He's the designer and patent holder of their SSL acceleration network, as well as several of the critical technologies underpinning the company's Kona security solutions. Andy is at the forefront of internet policy. As a speaker, blogger, member of the FCC CSRIC, supporting Akamai's CEOs on the NIAC and NSTAC, and an advisory board member of HackKid. He's a graduate of MIT and a former US Air Force officer, the recipient of the CSO Magazine Compass Award, the Air Force Meritorious Service Medal, and most importantly, the Wine Spectator's Award of Excellence. And finally, we have Dr. Patrick Traynor. Dr. Traynor is an associate professor in the Department of Computer and Information Science and Engineering at the University of Florida, where he co-directs the Florida Institute for Cybersecurity Research. He is committed to the real-world impact for his research and has co-founded 2 startup companies, CryptoDrop and PinDrop Security. His team has uncovered critical vulnerabilities in cellular networks, made the first measurement of mobile malware infections, and offers robust mechanisms for combating caller ID scams. Dr. Traynor received a career award from the National Science Foundation in 2010, was named a Sloan Fellow in 2014, a Fellow for the Center for Financial Inclusion at Axion in 2016, and a Kavli Fellow in 2017. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's get started. So, Andy, we're going to start with you. Last week, you gave a fairly provocative but powerful keynote address at RSA, challenging chief security officers to completely rethink how they view cybersecurity. Now, I'm not going to steal your thunder, but just briefly, you stressed that historically, the focus has always been on perimeter networks, and that there may be an irrationality to that, given one thing we can all conclude: it's not a matter of when, but it's not a matter if, but when your perimeter is going to be breached. Can you give us a little bit of a talk on that, obviously much more truncated version, and tell us, out of the various ways an enterprise grows, what security controls are no longer relevant, and dare I say, may actually be actively harmful for an organization as they start to scale?
Absolutely. So if we think about how we designed security, and I use designed very loosely in that sentence, it starts back with the Roman Empire, probably even further back, but the idea of a password was how you got past the perimeter, right? You'd walk up to the guards, and so they didn't shoot you. You'd say the password of the day is Scatale, and they'd let you get close enough to say, oh, hey, Private Johnson, come on in. And we've never really changed that. So we had this model which says the perimeter is my 4 walls, and if I let you in, you get access to my data. And that was okay when data was physical, right? We wrote down on pen and paper, and then the computer came along, and we replaced pens and papers with computers, and the perimeter was still an okay model to work from. But the problem today is that we don't have one central data store. Our devices are networked, our users are everywhere, and most importantly, the users carry data with them. And it's not just what they've memorized. One of my running jokes is I'm a walking data breach for Disneyland because they used to use social security numbers, and I typed so many of them when I was a teenager, I still remember people's socials. Except now they're on our phones, and they're on our laptops, and we're carrying them with us everywhere. And so our model of security needs to stop being about the perimeter between the user and our data, because that perimeter has been breached. And the way it's been breached is that the data now lives inside the user's perimeter, which is they're a cyborg. They carry this phone around with them. And so a model that says, if I let you into the perimeter, you get access to everything, and I'm done, means you're always going to be breached. And so what companies have to do is reverse this and think about the perimeter now as being inside the application. That how do I know you're you, and that device is really you? Because while I might have endpoint security, we can't guarantee that device is always going to be one that we can trust, because it's not in our physical control anymore. And so that's sort of the thrust of where we as security officers have to live. Now, to live in there, we have to acknowledge that many of our security controls are actively harmful to the business. They might not be harmful to our security, but our business partners don't like them. If I said, hey, Chris, I'd like you to pick a new password every 90 days, and I don't like the ones you pick, so I'm going to add new and strange requirements to them. And don't ever write them down, but make sure that they're really random in a way that humans couldn't memorize them. This is actively harmful. Chris is going to write it down, which in fact, I want him to do. Everybody here, if you walk away with nothing else, go write down your passwords. But do it in a password vault. Do it in a way that's encrypted, because the worst thing is reusing a password. But that's what we've convinced users to do, is log into every website with the same password, and when one gets breached, they all get breached. And that includes the password to my company intranet. So I don't want that. So that's why we've fundamentally changed how we do security, and we've been eliminating the password entirely.
Now walk the audience through this. I'm sure the first thing people are thinking of, all right, you've eliminated passwords, single sign-in. What's it look like? Tell me at Economy, how does that look?
So what it looks like is every one of our devices has a TLS certificate on it. So when you go to a website, in addition to you authenticating the website because it has a signed certificate, your device has a certificate signed that says it's your device. So that connects first, and that then triggers a push-based authentication to your phone to say, hey, you're trying to log in here from an authorized device. Let's just make sure that's really you. And it's a nice, clean, simple interface. The user isn't sitting on their phone trying to type a password across 4 different keyboards, hoping autocorrect doesn't get in the way. And they really love it. And what we've done is we've improved our security. There's no shared secret wandering around the network, while at the same time we've improved usability. Right? This thing we always told you can't do, which is have both usability and security, that was the objective.
Now, does this minimize the so-called specter of insider threat? We always hear among CSOs that the biggest threat, or one of the biggest threats, is you can have all the infrastructure you want, but there's that insider threat. There's that employee that just got terminated, they want to be malicious. There's that employee that just wants to be negligent. What's your assessment of how your new paradigm treats the insider threat?
So it shifts it a little bit, but not a lot. But the insider threat is, I think, vastly overblown. You can find every sort of metric you'd like about how prominent they are. Many of those are inflated. But the reality is you do have to worry about it, not because you have specifically malicious insiders. Most of us don't look at our coworkers and say, hey, I know you're out to get me, or I know you want to steal my data. But the problem is their system might have been compromised, and now for a short while they're acting like an insider. Or it might be that you got in their way. And so when they're trying to approve their admin's time card, if they had to type in their password on a painful interface, they'll just call their admin and say, hey, here's my password, go approve your own time card. And now they're situationally an adversary. So the goal is to remove that situational adversary by saying the security goals are your goals. That every one of your employees believes that you're actually trying to help them, and now they're not going to try to subvert the controls that you're going to put into place.
Chris, do you agree with Andy's assessment? Do you agree with this paradigm shift of focusing less on perimeter networks? And as importantly, do you agree with his assessment as to the primacy of individual and human behavior? Put another way, how important a role should the human user play in the security of an infrastructure?
Sure. Obviously, Sixtera, we definitely believe in the dissolution of the perimeter as it's traditionally been known in IT, and we have a product called AppGate that is a self-defined perimeter product. The big issue, though, everything Andy said is very true, but also when you think about the device sphere that orbits all of us, right? Your phone, your tablet, your laptop, how does that get managed? I want context around how people access the corporate network. Because if I'm on, to use Andy's example, I'm on the laptop that was issued by the company, has the TLS certificate, that's one context, and maybe that gives me a different level of access. But my BYOD tablet or phone, maybe I don't want to give that user as much access. And so it's perimeterless, but also contextual and dynamic. And I might want to control when they can access things, and depending on their geolocation, if they're in a different country or they're in a Starbucks, again, I want to control that. And products like ours and other zero trust model products help do that. On your second question about people, I'm a bit of a heretic in the sense that I think that users should be treated as somewhat hostile to the network. I don't like, so yes, users should get security awareness training, sure. Should your security depend on a user? Absolutely not. If your security of your enterprise depends on Johnny in accounting not clicking that phishing link, you've already lost the battle. And so we want to, in my opinion, we want to control and minimize what that attack surface looks like when Johnny makes that mistake.
So the goal is to remove the human agent as much as humanly possible. Obviously, you can't do it completely.
Exactly.
Does that mean compliance doesn't have a role anymore? Or how important is the role of compliance in the cybersecurity program?
So I look at compliance as part of the equation. Right? So as mathematicians, as we say, it is necessary but insufficient. And so, compliance helps control. It helps comply with the law. It helps make sure that, the basics are being done. It makes sure hygiene is being done. It allows you to compare organizations. All very, very important. But you're also dealing with, in many cases, an intelligent, motivated human adversary who's going to adapt to all the static things you put in place, particularly compliance. So that's where threat awareness, management, and mitigation come into play.
Now, I want to take this conversation to more of a tactical level. I know I said we wouldn't talk tactical too much, but there's one topic that we just can't ignore, and I'm sure you've seen in the news. There is an amazing rash of ransomware attacks that's going on. We had what happened to our friends in the city of Atlanta and the city of Baltimore. We've had a number, and this is what personally terrifies me, a number of attacks on health systems. And then you basically have a combination of factors now. We have an increase of an IoT infrastructure being done in most health systems now, and then combine that with a ransomware attack, we're no longer talking a loss of money, we're talking potentially loss of life. So Dr. Traynor, I'm going to throw this to you. I know you've done some work in ransomware. Let's start off with basics. Why are we seeing this proliferation of ransomware attacks?
That's a great question. So I want everyone to think back to about 2012 and compare, this is going to be a little sensitive, but compare the amount of Viagra emails you got in 2012 to now, and I bet you'd say it's a marked decline. Well, one of the things that happened was that credit card companies made it very difficult for people to purchase from these online pharmaceutical companies, and that whole way of making money really declined. So we see that in combination with the rise of cryptocurrencies and people with just even limited ability to code, that kind of created this perfect storm for ransomware to really take off. And since 2014, we've seen just an unbelievable year-on-year rise. So it doesn't take all that much sophistication to write ransomware. In fact, having analyzed a lot of it myself, I can tell you that, okay, this piece, this person didn't pass computer science class. They didn't. They don't know the best way to traverse a directory. Okay, these folks, they're clearly on their game. It turns out that it's very easy to monetize. Unlike spam, where I might have to send 1 million pieces in order to get one fish on the line. You know, I think it's something like 1 in 3 ransomware attacks actually ends up paying out.
So there's a little bit of a paradox then. You know, on the one hand, we're saying these attacks are among some of the easiest to launch, but yet our traditional infrastructure isn't stopping them. You would think if these are so easy to implement, our so sophisticated infrastructure would catch every single one. That's not happening. In fact, we're seeing quite the opposite. Why are these attacks getting through if they're so simplistic?
I mean, it's amazing. Look at Atlanta, for example. Atlanta was hit by Sam. That's the name of the particular strain. You can't tell me that Atlanta wasn't running AV software. We've been saying this in the research community for 10 years. AV is failing us, it's failing us. If this ransomware crisis, which is what it is, isn't convincing you of that, I'm not sure what will. I mean, quite frankly, we're doing the same thing over and over and over again and hoping that our traditional tools that we've relied on since the 80s are going to protect us, and they're just not. Again, Sam was known for 1.5 years, but the variant that hit Atlanta hadn't been seen that day. They shut down the Wi-Fi in the airport. Officers couldn't write tickets in the city, although I don't think that many people were that upset about that part. I heard from councilmen and women who said, I lost 15 to 20 years of files because we thought we had things backed up, but it turns out that, of course, we didn't. So it's just astounding.
All right, so we know what doesn't work, and this one I'm going to do for both Andy as well as Dr. Traynor. What does work? What have you seen be effective? And maybe this is just me being the stupid lawyer who doesn't understand this stuff enough. Why not just do a backup? I mean, why not just back up your data and be done with it? And that way, if they threaten your data, you're fine. If the answer is, hey, stupid lawyer, that's not that simple, then the follow-up question I would have was, what tactics have you seen work?
So it's actually a great question. It's something that I run across a lot. Let me give you an example from a close friend of mine from high school, works for a company that deals with medical records. There are about 200 employees. They got hit last summer, and they had hot backups and cold backups. So the first thing that the ransomware did, of course, was take out the hot backups. Everything was corrupted. So they said, no problem, we'll go to our cold backups. It turns out that those cold backups didn't cover everything. And so, it turns out the most important data that they had was among the stuff that was hit. So they couldn't actually recover. But even in the best case, where absolutely everything is backed up, our hard drives are massive these days. I mean, have you seen how long it takes to transfer over the network just for a single laptop? A terabyte of data times 200, 300 employees. If your backup system is in the cloud, What does your connection look like to the infrastructure? Good luck. So this small company, by the way, they ended up paying the ransom, but it still cost them between new infrastructure, between consultants, all of these effects, lost business, lost confidence, probably close to $1 million because of one simple piece of ransomware that was able to get through. I mean, it's unbelievable that it's so easy to take out these systems.
All right, so I pay the ransom, and what's to stop them from just doing it again and ransoming me again? What have you seen that works out there? And this is for both you and then Andy.
So one of the reasons why things like ransomware hit companies so hard is because the security model is very hierarchical. We say, look, we have the systems administrators, and they have root on everything, or administrative access. And so what happens is all you need is the right machine to get infected, and everything gets instantly infected. Right? So imagine, a community worrying about a health infection in which, every day everybody was swapping spit. And that's basically your IT infrastructure today. And so the places where we've seen ransomware doesn't propagate through an environment is where people break that model, where they say, look, modern OSs mostly self-update. There's no reason that an admin, when they're logged into their desktop, has a standing ability to log into every machine in the enterprise. Like, if you have that one thing in your company, go change it today. Even if all you do is create a second account that the admins have to use when they're pushing a software update, just so that when they click on a link and they get infected, it doesn't take out the entire enterprise. Right? That's the root of this challenge, is we've built systems that are not resilient communities. They're very much monocultures that are continuously interconnected with one another.
So am I hearing that the answer is you need to harden and make your infrastructure more resilient to withstand the attack, but once the attack happens, that there's fairly limited that we can do?
Well, what we can do is make sure that the attack doesn't spread and take out your whole organization. Now, there's other alternatives to backups, right? Somebody who says, I lost 15 to 20 years of files, the last 10 years of files I have are all already in the cloud. Like, that's their primary location with differential storage, so that as I change them, even if if I get compromised and it tries to alter them, I can just go back one version. I let somebody else solve that problem for me, rather than each person trying to reinvent the wheel of how to solve backups. Because, as Patrick pointed out, it's really expensive to try to back up your whole disk. But you don't need to. Like, if you need a new copy of Windows, you can get one pretty easily. The spreadsheet you've been working on is the expensive thing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, you brought up a great point. There's no Better Business Bureau for ransomware, so you're just not gonna, you don't know if you're going to actually get anything if you pay these folks. It's a 50-50 shot. And so you have to be a little more proactive than that. So we've taken research that we did at the University of Florida, and we've turned it into a startup. And looking to universities, I think, is another great way to tackle big problems like this. We have the freedom to tackle problems in different ways than sometimes the larger corporations can. And when we partner together, we can better understand the environments in which you're working in to make sure that those redesigned security approaches actually work in practice.
Chris, you got to chuckle out of the comment that there's no Better Business Bureau for this stuff. Just wondering, what are your thoughts? Are there any facets we're missing in this whole ransomware debate?
I think just more of a thing to think about. When Patrick made a great point about the simplicity of constructing these pieces of malware. Andy made the point about these wildfire events that get into a corporate network and the damage that it can do. Well, when you start to think about ransomware, instead of ransom, just think about it as it is a destructive denial of service method that is very easy to deploy, as we saw with Atlanta and Baltimore, literally shut down important critical functions of two major cities, right? Or the NHS in the UK when they got hit. So you start to realize that this weaponization is very tangible, very real, and does not require this nation-state class attack. And I think a lot of cities need to really be aware of that and start to think very hard about how they're going to defend themselves against that.
Do we think the municipalities get it? You were mentioning we have an eGov initiative over there, so if we know, we can all walk over and talk to them about it. But do you think the municipalities get it, that they need to throw the resources necessary to protect themselves? One, do they get the magnitude of the threat? And two, do they get what they need to invest to protect themselves from it?
Well, I think their awareness is there, unless they're not reading the newspaper. But I think the question of resources is the problem in many cases. Especially with some of our municipalities they have these ancient, aged infrastructures. They've got to tear all of that out at some level and replace it with much more modern infrastructure. Many just don't have the resources to do that, but there are ways to do overlays that can help mitigate that over time.
Is that your observation as well when dealing with the municipalities? The will is there, but the resources are sparse?
Absolutely. Most municipalities are facing funding crises year over year, and replacing their IT infrastructure is one of the hardest things for them to justify because it works until the day it doesn't. So I think our job as industry is often to identify places where we can help by providing services that aren't a capital outlay. Right? If you're a municipality, maybe you can move to something that's a cloud service that you're buying on demand, rather than, I've got to rip out like 85 accounting systems and buy all new hardware. That's going to be a really hard sell to a town manager.
Right. Now I want to jump to the inherent security risk involved in some of our evolution in terms of infrastructure. And first off, specifically cloud infrastructure. In the old days, we had more physical infrastructure, a simple, you had a discrete server, et cetera. Now as we evolve to cloud, and both Andy and Chris, I want you each to give your thoughts on this, given your business models. Chris in particular, because I know Cyxtera has some very interesting solutions in this regard. What are the challenges? And bear in mind, in this audience, you have a great amount of diversity. And many of them are CEOs, CTOs, CIOs, who are struggling with this notion of, okay, we've now drank the Kool-Aid, shouldn't use that analogy, but we all have accepted that the cloud is the way to go. But now that does pose security issues. What do we do? What are the issues and how do we solve them?
Good.
So I think one issue you have to look at is sort of what's the provenance of your cloud, right? Cloud means a lot of different things. Every company that uses it has a different meaning for it. Sometimes there's a startup and you say, great, I'm willing to take the risk on this business that might not be here in 2 years. Sometimes you're not willing to. If you're looking at moving your whole productivity suite, you could pick Google, you could pick Microsoft, there's a couple others, but if I started up a company today and I was going to do your word processing on demand, maybe you should think a little more carefully about giving me all of your documents. So I think one piece is looking at what is your risk profile, what are you willing to trade off, what is the harm that could happen to you, either through a breach or through a loss of the data. I think those are the two big challenges you'll often have to look at with cloud. But an important thing is really just walking in it with your eyes open and saying, not just what are the risks of the cloud, but what are the risks of my current model? Because all too often people will look at a cloud and they'll say, oh my God, this is horrible, I'm putting my email in the cloud. What if that gets breached and disclosed? Well, what if the email on your hosted system gets breached and disclosed? Like that's what's happened to many enterprises. Your real risk is not your email being breached, it's the people you have that are writing emails that you really don't want breached.
Chris, your thoughts?
And I think when you look at a lot of the cloud services you can buy, so Office 365, for example, Microsoft's done a very good job of securing at a baseline level that infrastructure. They've built in a number of defensive capabilities right into the product. So as an organization, though, you need to then look, to Andy's point, look at your threat profile and your risk appetite and say, what do I need to add to what my cloud provider is giving me, one, and then two, you need to think about how you're controlling access to it. You need to think about how you are instrumenting that. One of the things that we often lose when we go to cloud service providers is visibility, especially when you think about traditional enterprise networks. I could have full packet capture running everywhere. I get all this visibility into the infrastructure that I then lose. And so closing that gap, it's possible, and we, for example, at Cyxtera, we're working with some of our cloud service partners to actually help enable that so that you get back that visibility and the analytics that go with that.
All right, and now final infrastructure challenge, IoT, Internet of Things. We know that the next frontier is all devices being connected. In particular, I tend to focus on this in the healthcare sector. We know from the IV pumps to the EMR, et cetera, everything gets connected to the point where distribution becomes automated. What are the threats we're seeing in that environment? I mean, is it real? Is it a true magnitude? It seems like it to me. And what are the solutions we're seeing in order to guard against that? We'll start with Andy, and then we'll work our way to Chris.
So I think the important thing of IoT is to remember that the S in the acronym stands for security. these are devices that are built to be the lowest common denominator. If you want a security camera, right, all that you care about is how many pixels you get and how long you can do data storage. And that's what you're buying. You're not buying it for the user interface. Anybody who's tried to use one knows that's for sure. And that spans the entire world of IoT. So most of the devices being deployed today are being built by people who are paying absolutely no attention to security. There are exceptions, but the real challenge is you're going to deploy them not in a consumable fashion. You're not going to deploy it and in 3 years replace it like you did with your iPhone 1. You're instead going to deploy it and be living with the challenges 30 years from now. I think that's the real issue that we're facing with IoT, is not actually in the present day. We are currently sowing the seeds of challenges we're going to have for the next 3 decades. For those of us on the defensive side, it's great, it's guaranteed employment, but I could wish that we could get a little further ahead faster.
And Chris?
It's great for people on the offense side too. Easy to get into. I think Andy's exactly right, but I also think you need to add in the additional problems of, these devices, they're inexpensive, but they're never going to get replaced in many cases. They're not upgradable in many cases. So once the problem is discovered, they can't be fixed. In some cases, especially on the consumer side, a lot of the RF protocols that connect these devices wirelessly to the network are, while security was built in, it was completely broken by the vendors. And so it's almost impossible to have security in those environments. And you have the problem of they have a physical sensor and in many cases physical actuators. So that's where you get into the life safety issues. The way I feel about it a little bit, for those of you who are old enough like me, if you remember how enterprise IT was in the mid-90s, running on Windows 95 and NT4, and how bad things were from a security perspective, that's how it feels today from my perspective in IoT, but yet there's the pain is going to go on for a very long time.
Perfect. Well, as with anything, as we scale technology and things grow exponentially and Moore's Law kicks in, the challenges are going to keep increasing. But I do feel comfortable having this distinguished panel protecting us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. That's the downside to having folks with so many great engaging thoughts. But we thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts with eMerge, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue. Our panelists will be around afterwards. Feel free to come to mingle, to talk, and ask further questions. But we thank you all for your participation. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you.